Welcome and good morning or good afternoon, wherever you're coming in from. We've got another great episode of Go to Market Fridays. My co-host Meg and I have been doing this for over 3 years. We've got over 300 plus go to market topics, largely ABM related, sales, marketing, anything of best practices. If you have questions specifically today, we've got a special guest, and we're going to be talking about a returning guest, Kathleen Schraub. This is her third time actually setting a record for us, our first third time repeat guest. And we'll do a proper introduction. She's an author. She's been a CMO advisor. She's also been a CMO. She's got a large depth of expertise, but most recently, the author part being the marketing in the great, big, messy, real world. We're going to do a deep dive onto that in another way. But really excited to have you, and maybe I'll pass it over to Meg to do a proper introduction of Kathleen.
Well, I think you did a pretty great job there, John. And thanks everyone for joining us. And Kathleen, thank you for the three-peat.
My pleasure.
Continue to see really interesting content from you, especially for those who don't follow Kathleen on LinkedIn. I highly recommend that you do, as well as pick up her book, Marketing in the Great Big Messy Real World, which is about how to rewire marketing to navigate anything, which is, I think, something all of us would like to be able to do a lot better. Hence, Kathleen coming back for a third time. And today's topic is one that I think all of us can relate to and understand. Kathleen, I'm sure you as a former CMO and also advisor to CMOs can particularly, speak to, which is why we're excited today. But a lot of times I think we fall into the trap in B2B marketing of wanting things to be more certain than they really are. And the problem with that is it's led to us relying on this concept of marketing as factory that produces predictable, consistent results. The problem is it's not really a factory. So Kathleen, I'm excited for you to talk to us today about some of the ways that you think marketing leaders and marketing organizations can navigate the change to sort of recognize the world we're in versus the world we want, and what that could look like. But Kathleen, thank you again for joining us. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much, both Meg and John. It's always a fun conversation with you guys, so I always look forward to it. And yeah, I mean, it seems like things just keep getting more crazy and more crazy, doesn't it? So it's going to be, I think, a perennial topic. And, that desire for certainty, that's human, right? I mean, it's scary to think about, all of the change and stuff. A lot of the change is really actually very good. But, change in general, when you think about your life or whatever as being, as what that's going to be about. But as you pointed out, Megan, that the reality is that marketing, markets, business, economies, they are what scientists call complex systems, which means they are going to be VUCA, right? Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And while we can use as many tools as we can to try to make these more certain, and we certainly have made major progress over the last century, really, and certainly in the last 20 years or so to make things more certain, we're never going to change the core nature of what markets and business is really like. So what I am focused on at this point in my life is how can we embrace that complexity, embrace that uncertainty, and find the best tools, including information tools, AI tools, or whatever, that will help us to thrive despite the fact that it is uncertain, because we're never going to make it. We're never going to make it into that factory that people would love to have.
Well, I think these days in particular, we see a level of uncertainty. And Kathleen, one of the concepts you talk about in your book and in some of the content that you've posted is this idea of moving into a world of probabilistic thinking. And I know back in my business school days, we talked about things like scenario planning and managing probabilities, things like that. I would love for you to just kind of give us a little bit of a grounding in some of the definitions that you think are important in this shift away from the factory mindset over to the complex system mindset, including things like probabilistic thinking? What are some of the terms that you think people should know and embrace?
Yeah. So maybe we just start out with probability. What is probability? And I think probably a lot of people who are listening here are going to remember statistics and probability. Probably not your favorite class, although I really liked it, but not a lot of people find statistics or whatever. So probability can be kind of hard to grasp. It's vague in the way that like beauty is, what is beauty, or but although we might not be able to define it really precisely, we all kind of know what it is. It's the degree of certainty that we have about something happening. So, for example, one of the examples I use is we have a high certainty, if there's a high probability that the sun is going to rise tomorrow morning. There is a very, very low probability that the sun is going to be blue. So, but a lot of the things that are in between, including marketing or how hot it is going to be, what's the weather, that is a probability that exists in that sort of no man's land. And that's kind of where we kind of get stuck. But there are tools that will help us to kind of maneuver in this world of probability. So when we think about probability, maybe we just think about chance. What's the degree of confidence that we have, the degree of faith that something is going to happen? And when it comes to creating that sort of living system, complex system view, we just have to agree that marketing exists in the middle. The factory view tries to push it towards which side is my hands? It tries to push it towards the side that says that the sun is going to rise tomorrow, and we all want to know we're going to get this many leads tomorrow. We're going to have this amount of revenue or this amount of pipeline or whatever it is. We want to be able to agree. And in very, very stable kinds of markets where you have a lot of people and it's not a lot of innovation and it changes very slow, those trends will happen so gradually that, we can get closer to the sun is going to rise tomorrow. Whereas if you're in a high innovation, business to business, maybe AI infused, you're kind of down towards, the lower confidence, maybe not as low as the sun's going to be blue, but somewhere in the middle, maybe it's been shifting down towards that more volatile side. So when we think about probability, it's that middle range, and it's going to be, a little bit here or there, depending on what your particular market environment is like.
So maybe just doing a double click into that. And, first of all, I love the VUCA analogy. I think the VUCA and the OODA loop were the two themes that I recall. And they have military connotations, but it's just
They do.
kind of pivoting and learning in a very volatile environment is kind of the takeaway on that. And I love that analogy. But just thinking about your probabilistic thinking, so it sounds like the lead model and the linear funnel, that's kind of out the window in some businesses or many businesses. Maybe just double click into a little bit more of what does that look like then in those businesses that should be not thinking about those elements, that maybe are thinking about, like, how does that look?
Now, okay, let me ask the question a little bit more deeply then. Are you talking about from from the metrics point of view, or what? Could you explain
Well,
what you're
yeah.
kind of
So I
looking for
guess
a
what
little
I'm
bit?
hearing kind of you say is in the factory model of leads, that is kind of the older way of thinking about it. Now there's this newer way of probabilistic thinking. So what does that look like in practice? Like how would you
Okay.
operationalize that?
Okay. So if let's set up those two views then. So the mechanistic model, or the marketing as a factory, it inherits a lot of its its methods and mindsets from the Industrial Revolution, because we, way back in the early 20th century or before, there's a very, very heavy focus on deterministic KPIs. So things like how many leads did we generate, or, conversion by stages, because, everything's very factual, MQL versus SQL, or, sales cycle length. Those kinds of things, you don't want to necessarily throw them out of the window completely. They do have some value, but you also want to put more emphasis on the broader multi-level kinds of metrics. So for example, you're looking for leading indicators like revenue or how many leads we projected. Those are all things that have happened in the past. If you have a very stable world, then you can probably depend on what happened in the past to be somewhat predictive of what's going to happen in the future. Although we all know from things like COVID and certainly from AI, it's happening now, that doesn't always work. But most of the time, if you have a very stable kind of a world, you can kind of say, okay, it's going to be at least close to this. If you have a very, very volatile world where a lot of innovation is happening, a lot of competition, a lot of customer change, then again, that's going to be farther down. So certain things like, I would say search behavior, but of course that's being thrown up in the air now with AI, but things that you learn from customer interviews or other kinds of customer behavior, how relationship depth, account health, brand equity, trust kinds of things. They're not things that you're necessarily going to get on a day-to-day basis, but they can give you a forward look at what might be happening. So Megan, you used the word navigate. That's certainly part of the title, and thinking like a navigator, and being you have to come up with ways that you can see forward, leading signals, leading kinds of indicators. And whereas in the factory world, you're also going to assume that those metrics are going to be stable and that they're going to improve linearly. In the ecosystem, the living system world, you want to look at variance as data instead of failure. So whereas, in the deterministic world, if you predicted that you were going to get X number of leads and that didn't happen, then the deterministic world would say, oh, you failed. You didn't come up with what you said. In the living system world, you say, oh, I expect variation. What can this variation tell me about what's happening? So you're looking at this, how does the system behave? And my customers and myself and my sales force or my competitors, how do they show me how the system is evolving, or there certainly are trends, but those trends are just not as stable as we would hope to. So there's a couple of different reasons, or a couple of different ideas about how that might manifest. There certainly are a lot more, but that gives you a little bit of a flavor.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things we talked about in the promotion for this discussion, and that you and I have talked a lot about, Kathleen, is this idea of setting expectations with your CEO, with other executives, in terms of what marketing can deliver to the business, and how it's very tempting to want that factory type of outcome, to be able to point to, this is what you can expect from marketing, and therefore you need to give me X dollars in my budget. But we know the reality is what you're talking about, this kind of idea of a complex system with a lot of different elements to it that are varying degrees of predictable and sometimes completely unpredictable in terms of what they're going to do. So if you've got that disconnect between what many people would like the world to be and what the world is, as a marketing leader, what are some of the ways that you've seen people successfully shift that conversation? How would you advise them when they're saying, I hear you, now what?
Yeah, because I think, it's normal. And going back to what we were talking about before, I mean, we really want the world to be more certain, right? Because it can be very frightening. It also, being sympathetic to CEOs and CFOs, it is hard to manage a business when you are not completely sure what your revenue is going to be. And again, if you're Coca-Cola or Procter and Gamble, where you have less innovation and, big markets and less stability, or more stability, I should say, it's pretty, maybe I shouldn't be speaking of the CEO of Coca-Cola as might disagree with me, but it seems like it would be easier to, project to Wall Street or to your investors or whatever about what you think your revenue is going to be, being in a tech company or other kinds of B2B where you have, very complex, long sales cycles and high consideration is going to be difficult. So I 100% sympathize with the executives who really feel like they need to demand and that kind of certainty that would help them to run their business well. But since we know that can't happen, I think we need to look at the data and the processes as being a way to sort of have the conversation as to make it into a dialogue that everybody's involved in. So you want to, if you are a marketing leader who is coming to the position like, okay, I get it, I'm not going to be able to produce the factory that everybody wants, there is no time like the present to start that conversation, because it's not going to change. It's not like if you're going to wait, 6 months or whatever, that somehow a miracle is going to occur and yes, marketing can become a factory. So I think it's more honest and it's more realistic to really position that change as a strategic shift. We're all learning. Don't admit that you failed or anything, because it's not a failure, right? That's part of the evolution and part of the navigation. You don't navigate in a way to say, oh, an island popped up where we didn't know there was an island, or, a big wave or whatever. I failed because I hit a big wave. You want to bring as much data-driven clarity as you possibly can to the conversation, but position it as a way for us to learn, all of us together, about what's working and what's not, and how we have to adapt to the future. So, things that, the data that we get from marketing automation systems is helpful. But you don't want to take that data too far. You don't want to assume that what you're getting out of your, for example, in rules-based attribution, it is not, that is a factory-oriented kind of a metric. Instead, again, you want to move towards these more multi-touch, probabilistic marketing mix modeling kinds of things. So some of the things that I've seen people do, and some of the recommendations, because I have this conversation with a lot of people who work with executives. One is that you want to make sure that you've really documented your buyer's journey fully, and you've done that from an outside in point of view. Not the lead funnel is an inside view, the buyer's journey is an outside view. And I've seen a lot of people make that error and confuse it, saying, oh yeah, I have my buyer's journey. And then you look at it and it's a lead funnel. No, that's not the same thing. That's a business process. And then, for as much accuracy as you can, get as much data as you can, covering as full of the journey as you possibly can. And then once executives see how complex it is and how much data you can get and how much is missing, they're much more likely to trust what you're talking about and distrust the short-term mechanistic kinds of things. So those would be some ways that I would start those conversations. And again, the main thing is viewing the data and the process as a constantly, and just keep having that conversation and trying to get as much information as you possibly can.
Yeah, I love the way you frame that in terms of, first having empathy and sympathy in dealing with the CEO and CFO for this change management.
100%.
But using that data to drive the conversation is critical for that change management. And I like how you brought us along on that journey. Let me just press on that a little bit more, just so I'm clear on it. And I'm thinking about my operating roles in this environment too. There's a lot of people changing jobs. So is there a window to introduce this change? Or I think you were kind of hinting toward it, like, hey, there's no time like the present. if you've been in the role for a year or 18 months, are you okay introducing this kind of change then? And is there any difference in what your advice would be in the timing of that person starting? And there might not be.
Well, if you're starting a new role, everybody is kind of cognizant of the fact that you have a window of opportunity that people, when you're new, people do expect change. So it's actually a really good time to introduce it when you're new. But I would go back to the fact that there is no time like the present to start that conversation. At the same time, it's not any change that's an organizational changes. I'm not a believer in the, today we do it this way, tomorrow we do it, something different. You do have to run the business, and you do have your business processes that you have. I've made the analogy that it's like, trying to change the lanes on the freeway during rush hour. You can't just stop traffic and go, okay, everybody, we're going to change, and there will be some learning that happens within your organization as well as just within the leadership. So you want to be able to maybe run things in parallel. A couple people that I know that have done a lot of this kind of change management recommend that the marketing group run have the conversation in general, but let the marketing group kind of run a behind the scenes with some new kinds of processes and new kinds of, maybe you have to bring some new kinds of experts in to advise or work with you, provide some kind of analytic skill that you may not have, and get a feeling for what's going to happen and be able to answer some of the questions. It would be normal for the CEO and the CFO to ask a lot of questions about what you're going to do. And if you're just standing there going like, I don't know, I'm learning as much as you are, that's probably not the best stance. So I think getting some expertise, but it is amazing. And I think maybe everybody will kind of relate to this. When you set an intention and you start seeing where you're going to go, the opportunities continue to pop up where you didn't realize that they were going to pop up. So I think start early, but be wise and strategic about how you want to start. So don't avoid the conversation and keep pretending like it's a factory, but at the same time, there's some preparation and some strategy involved in how you want to kind of onboard or get the two going, and then eventually you're replacing a lot but not all. Again, you're still going to probably measure your leads, you're still going to probably measure your pipeline, you just won't view it deterministically the way that you did before.
Kathleen, I think you bring up a couple of really important things in that model and that way of thinking that I would love for you to talk a little bit more about. I think one is the role of curiosity and how you can help your team look at, to your point, at different outcomes and different data and start to say, what is this telling me? What am I learning from this? As opposed to, like you said, if it's a number that I don't like, that we failed. So I'd love to talk a little bit more about how you encourage your team to start to dig into what they're seeing and sort of develop that muscle of analytics and curiosity kind of on a day-to-day basis. But the other thing that you brought up that I think is really important is this concept of context, right? Where you're saying you may still report on traditional things like a lead funnel. It's the context that you're putting that data in and the curiosity, back to the first point, that you put around it that's going to make the difference. What are some of the things you think marketing leaders can do to encourage that kind of thinking on their team? And then hopefully in their executives, but let's start with the team.
Yeah. So this is what I love talking about with you, Megan, because you always have a way of bringing out what are the curiosity and the context. Yes, both of those things are really important. And so let me talk about actually the context first, because the context I think relates to the mindset. So if you have a mindset that probabilistic mindset. Marketing is messy. The real world is messy. Marketing is VUCA. And you think about the world this way. And you have to be a navigator. And actually in my book, I have 4 mindsets. The navigator is one. There's also, think like an investor and think like a statistician, which is more about the real probabilities. And then think like an ecologist, which relates to the culture and the people, which I'll get to in just a second. But if you change your mindset and you start thinking about the world as being probabilistic, and that's okay, and that you can be successful and thrive despite the fact that you're never going to be able to, control things, then everything starts to look different. But you then need to support your team in this, and even to support yourself and to support your executives. The culture needs to evolve. And I'll just say up front what we all kind of know, and that the people piece is the hardest piece, right? Because you can change your operations, you can change your metrics, but if you don't change the heartbeat and you don't change the way that people interact, then then change can ping pong back to where it was before. So and changing culture is the most challenging and takes the longest time. But you want to be able to develop and encourage an environment where people can learn safely, because that is an important aspect of adaptability, because you're going to move from control, which you can't really do, to adapting and resilience. And those things mean that that experimentation has to be okay. Learning has to be okay. Again, if something happens, what was that famous saying or whatever about, I haven't failed. What was the famous, John, you'll probably remember this.
I think it was Thomas Edison, right?
Thomas Edison. Yes. Thank you.
It's that.
I haven't failed 500 times or whatever. Yes.
Or something
yeah,
like
I'm
that.
sorry. Repeat that again. I talked over you. But so you have to develop. And in my book, I talk about certain cultural attributes that are useful for helping the team to move forward. And all of us are humans. We exist in this all together. It's not going to be just the team. It's also going to be the C-suite. Everybody has to evolve to have this culture. Curiosity is a cultural attribute. I mean, you can be curious as a person, but you want your whole group to be curious, but curious with intention. It's not just like, hey, let's just do whatever we want and see what happens. You have a focus and an intention and a mission, and all of those things work. So again, you're not throwing out the good stuff. You're just looking at it through a new mindset.
I just noticed the time here. I think we could continue to
we
go
over
on
time?
for quite some time, but maybe to wrap things up, any final advice or tips to consider when somebody's embarking on this change management journey?
Yeah, maybe since you wrote up or put a thing about the mission there, when you're thinking about making this change, you need to remember that you're not just making it in a vacuum or because it's a good thing to do. As marketing, you have a role within the business, and everything needs to harken back to, how marketing fits in with the business, and to really, really understand what the executives, the C-suite is trying to do with the business, and how can you help. But you're just going to help in this new way. So you want your marketing metrics, and you want to move towards analytical approaches and stuff that work better, but you still want to be able to link it to the overall business. And I think if you do that, you're going to be successful, and you're going to be able to thrive. There'll be some bumps along the way. AI is going to produce some bumps. The economic uncertainty is going to produce some bumps, but you'll be much farther along in being able to do this. And you know how to do it. You know how to do it because you do it in everyday life. and you'll be able to transfer that to business. I firmly believe that people can do that. And I've seen it.
Well, thank you, Kathleen. And we just put your book up there. I'm going to put the
Thank
title
you.
up. Thanks, John, for putting that comment in. I'm sure you sold a few more copies today because I think this has been very helpful. And I appreciate you giving us some good ideas and coaching around how we can manage all of the things that are happening in the world
Thanks.
without disrupting the work of marketing, but instead evolving the work of marketing. So thank you very much
Thanks.
for talking
Yeah.
with us today.
And I invite people to continue that conversation on LinkedIn. Just connect with me, and love to have those conversations. So thanks. And thank you very much for having me.
And coincidentally, one of your readers commented here, Mark Sirkin said, "Hey, I was just about to sit down with Kathleen's book and a cup of coffee when I saw the stream start." So very good timing on that part from one of the readers. So thank you, Kathleen, and thank you, Mark, for chiming in.
All right.
Excellent.
And with that, I think we'll call it a wrap. Again, thank you, Kathleen. Thank you, John. And we wish everybody a very happy Friday.
Thanks again.